Hey everybody, welcome to God's Men of Influence. Today's show is going to be a little bit different from what we usually do. It's going to be really just a special on fatherhood. And it's one of the key components as to what I believe it takes to be a godly man, a God's man of influence. And the three things that we focus on here is going to be being a better husband, being a better father, and then being a better worker. Whether that means you're an employee, an employer, whatever it is, doesn't matter, but having Christian-like values and integrity in the workplace. So for purposes of this show, we're going to focus in on fatherhood. And I brought over Harry Robinson, who he's a pastor and also somewhat of a specialist on this field. You do talk to a lot of men, I believe, on fatherhood, right?
Yes. In fact, I did for a long time family ministries within a church I was a pastor of. And a passion of my heart is fathers raising their sons to be men, and especially men of God.
Yeah. So, Harry, I got 4 kids. 2 girls, 10 and 8, and then 2 boys, 3 and 1. And
yes. Congratulations to you.
Thank you. I feel very blessed when it comes to that. But at the same time, I have a lot of responsibility. And I pray all the time for wisdom. But kids tend to throw some curveballs at you all the time.
Yes,
and I don't always have the answer. And what happened is one of the men that I interviewed early on, he suggested I read the book How to Raise a Modern Day Knight, and I read it, and I got to admit it worked. Something within me happened, and I started thinking about a lot of the stuff, and I wanted to explore a little bit more of that book, kind of like the values and the teachings that it offers, but then also integrate the stuff that you teach about. And you know, the bottom line is I want you to teach me today about my 3 and 1 year old. And I feel like they're at an early enough of a stage and of an age that I can do things right.
Yeah.
You know, and then I want to create that the process, as I guess you can say, of what I should be doing now, and then men that haven't had the luxury of starting this young, how they can jump in at whatever age they're at and continue that process with success. So. Take it away.
Well, that book, Raising a Modern Day Knight by Robert Lewis, has been the book that changed my life as well. In fact, when my son was just about 2 years old, it actually may have been a little earlier than that, Robert Lewis's book came out and I read it. And it really gave me a clear vision of what it is and what it meant to be a father who leads his son into the pathway of becoming a man. Because one of the things that the book clearly talks about is the influence a father has on the life of his sons. Good, bad, or indifferent, he has influence on his sons. And he tells a story about how his dad had an influence on him. And the influence on his dad, on him, was about his dad was just kind of a non-presence. He was there, but he wasn't really there. And there's a lot of questions that he had about life, about, what does it mean to be a man. And Robert Lewis in this book really specifically outlines the process of rites of passages. And when I read the rites of passages that he performed, he kind of gave a basis of how to look at performing these rites or executing these rites of passages. He says that you have to have a definition that allows you to define what the process is. And there has to be kind of symbols that are represented of these passages. And then there's also a ceremony that recognizes the value that you're placing on them. And, like anything, if you have a ceremony behind something, if you win an award or if you are honored for something, to be given it to you just like, hey, you number one, here, go. It's not as significant. But if you have a ceremony behind it, it makes a big deal. When I worked as a pastor at this church, in this ministry, one of the things that I found very important for fathers and to do with their sons and their daughters, and even in family events that we did, is that we allowed the dad or the mom to always verbally speak out something to their children, a blessing over them or a direction in their life, in the presence of other people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you hardly do, as long as you bring them together and they're in this place that is significant and you speak life into them, the kids recognize it very, very clearly.
Yeah.
So I really like the the definition that Robert gives in his book is he says that a real man takes responsibility. A real man rejects passivity. He leads courageously. He accepts the greater reward. And I always add on there, he talks about too, that he has a woman to love. And you're in that way teaching your sons that at an early age, he's learning how to love his mother. And he's learning that through the father who loves his mother. And one day he's going to learn how to love his wife. So
there's really a lot there that as a father, you have to lead through example.
Yes.
You can't just tell them what to do. You can't just create opportunities for them.
Yes. You
actually have to, they're going to look at their dad. And what their dad does, they're going to emulate.
Yeah, that's the very case. When I was raised, a lot of the things that I feel like I learned it through my dad. I watched what he did, and as being a man of faith, I've learned to trust God as a result of that. And when I went into doing rites of passages for my children as a result of kind of listening and seeing what Robert Lewis has done, I recognized that there are some things that I have learned from my dad, although he may not have defined it as finely and may not have attached any symbolism to it or had a ceremony. The ways that he did things, he always was at my football games or my sporting events. If he wasn't there, I could tell that he was disappointed to not be there. I often heard him speak of me and things of what I've done and who I am to his friends. So I actually heard those words from him, even though he didn't say them in a ceremony directly for me. And he would always take me with him to go do things, and he would show me that, a man does this, and he'd have me working with him at, handing him tools if he was fixing something or out in the yard fixing something. So he demonstrated for me this real life, this is what a man does, and I got to see what happens when he does that. Yeah. So for what I've done with my children, and you've got children 1 and 3 years old, which is a perfect time because I oftentimes talk to fathers who have sons who are in their teens, and they're so saddened by the fact that they didn't do things before, and the road has kind of gone a different direction. But with children that are young, one of the things that I've done is I've started a Rites of Passage that began at 5 years old. So
real quick, let's define this Rites of Passage so people that haven't read the book understand what we're talking about. And I'll explain. Yes. If I'm off, let me tell everybody. So in America, where we are right now, there's really an issue with when does a boy become a man, right?
Exactly.
Is it when he turns 16 and starts driving? Is it when he turns 18 and graduates from high school, or 18 and is able to join the military? Is it when he turns 21 he's able to start drinking? Mm-hmm. Or is it at whatever age he has sex for the first time? Yes. Do any one of those or a combination of those create manhood for these kids? And the answer is none of them do. None of them. Because you can be in the military risking your life fighting for your country, but yet you're not old enough to go buy a beer. Yeah. Doesn't really make sense. Yeah. You could have sex and you could father a child, but yet you're not. You can be far away from being a responsible man. Far away from being a responsible man. So these rites of passage that he's talking about is to create these landmark-like items or opportunities that happen in one's life that tell the boy, you've now graduated to this other level. And at the other level, until you hit that level that your father has put upon you as now you're a man. Yes. And you do it in stages, so they know that when they reach this milestone, they've now accomplished this, and this is their rank, so to speak. And I think the example that the book used was to wish become a knighthood. A knight, right? But you start as a squire. A squire, yes. Right. And a page, and so you're the difference between being in the house and being outside of the house, being with the mom, being then with the dad, where he begins to learn, and he learns the skills of being a knight. So there is this passage that there are specific things you're learning along the way. So it's not just like you get to a certain age, and once you get to a certain age, then okay, check, you're there. But all along in the process, you're learning some things.
So one of the key things that I find with what you define, everybody has to have a definition. So my definition of what a man may be, I've adapted it to what Robert Lewis talked about, where we talked about that he takes responsibility, rejects passivity, leads courageously, and accepts a greater reward. Those things, you could begin to infuse those things into your sons at that level with the level that's appropriate for them. So when my son turned 5 years old, he had already begun to hear that what a real man does are these things. And so when he became 5 years old, we sat him down in front of all of the family members, and we began to talk in his life and said, Cole, Jacob, you're going to become a man one day. And my job as your father is to lead you into that pathway. And there are key things that I am going to be teaching you as to what a real man does. And I took those definitions, and when I said he takes responsibility, and I could say responsibility would be things like if your mom says to clean up your room, and you decide, I'm going to go clean up my room and do that. Or if you see that there is something that needs to be done in the house, there's trash on the floor, you need to pick it, you're going to reject the passivity, and you're going to say, you know what, I could let somebody else pick that up, but I think I'll pick it up. I'm going to accept a greater reward. That means maybe I'll do my chores now versus later, because if I do my chores and I do it consistently, then I might have an opportunity to do more things to accomplish or go with my friends when the opportunity comes. And lead courageously. I always use that as an example when he has young siblings, and that when there are opportunities to lead, even when it seems like it's going to be kind of scary and frightening, that we lead courageously. And a father has to be demonstrating all of those things all at the same time, and to be able to open up and communicate directly to your sons, to be able to say to your sons, your father had to take the opportunity to lead at this time, and it wasn't always easy. And in fact, I was a little afraid to do this, but I knew I had to watch out for you, and I knew I had to watch out for your mom, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, or I went ahead and do that. So these levels, as they go, and appropriately communicating to them at their specific stage what each of these roles might be.
Now, do you start talking about what's going to happen when they turn 5 early on, or do you interject it for the first time at 5 and then you begin the process?
Well, when they were going to be turning 5, that we talked about at 5, there's going to be a ceremony that we're going to do, that you're going to begin to be on the pathway to becoming a man. So that really began the clear definition of what that was. But it was, because I think for most people, 5-year-old for your children is like, you're going to go to school and all these things are going to happen at 5 years old. And so this was like 5 years old, you're going to be on your path to manhood. And for us, at 5, he received a bead on a necklace, and all of my siblings, my older brothers, wore this necklace that had a bead, and it was a symbol of being a man and entering into manhood. So each of them who wore it, we could identify and say, one day you're going to wear that full bead. And so when he was 5 years old, he got one bead. When he was 10 years old, we had another Rites of Passage. And then at 13, he got another bead. And then 18, he got the sets of the beads of necklace.
So is it several beads that there are 4 or 5
beads? Yeah, so there are a total of 4 beads, 5 beads that are on there. And so we space it out, and so you get the whole set of beads.
And you walk around after you got his first one. I'm a man.
I'm on my way to be there. Exactly. And it was so interesting is that symbol, and Robert makes it very specific that there's got to be symbols. That symbol means something to your son. It means something. Just like when we get, like you talked about your driver's license, that's a symbol. It means something. I've achieved the diploma. It means something I've achieved. When you give your children these seeds of symbols, or these representations of something that is greater than themselves or than what is current, it leads them in that pathway. It leads them in the pathway of something that they can expect.
So you play football or soccer or basketball, everybody gets a trophy.
Yeah.
Is this the type of thing where you tell them ahead of time what it's going to take to receive that bead? And even if they turn of age, if they haven't done it, they don't get the bead? Or do they get the bead no matter what at that age?
Well, they get the bead, but what you are doing is you're speaking into their life. In most cases, it's not a award for achievement. It's an recognition of their efforts, and it's not like we're trying to say, well, you've won, it's not the same thing as since you're on the team, you get a trophy kind of a thing. It's like you are on the team and you're giving some effort. And this is not about you're better or bigger than someone else. This is about you specifically and the pathway that you're walking down.
Got it.
And so I always make that a very key thing. I don't want to make it an achievement for him, but more of I see you walking in this path. And for fathers, I would say very clearly, and I would encourage you that when you see your sons doing something that is connected to what it is that you've said, this is what a man does, be very sure to bless those things. Speak of those things to your children, because when you speak of those things, that then takes an anchor, puts an anchor into their soul of that connection. A lot of times parents, always want to be able to say, do this versus don't do that or don't do that. And there's a message that we give them that really kind of shrinks them down, as opposed to seeing something and saying, that really is what a man does.
Yeah.
Wow, you're really becoming a man. Well, that's when their chest starts going out. It's like, yeah, that's right. I am becoming a man.
Yeah. What do you do if you're not fortunate enough to start at the early age like I am, and your kid's already, let's call it 14, 15 years old? Mm-hmm. Is there a fast track approach, or do you just kind of throw them right into where they should be at that age?
Well, I think in every circumstance, wherever you are with any person in life where you've not done what you wish you had have done, to be open and very candid about, we've headed down this path, and I wish we had headed down another path, and I'm going to explain that to you, why I think it would have been better for us to head this direction. And that's got to be recognized as a heart change for the father, and it's a place where that authenticity and that uncovering of a mask that says, I've always got the right answer. It's the son is going to hear you a lot different when you say, you know what, we were going down a path I thought was right, but it's not.
Yeah.
And if he's authentic in that way, and he has a clear direction, and he's transparent in that way, and has a clear direction where he wants to lead the son now, I think your son is going to be a little more receptive. And if the kid has kind of been wandering for a life, you're probably not going to expect him to change right away, but his eyes are going to be open a little bit to say, what are you meaning by this? And that's where the father's life and his example is really going to show up in spades to be able to say, hey, something really is happening differently. Yeah. But to be sure to have that definition connected to what now we're looking to see as a real representation of what it means to be a man.
Now, the book also says if you don't have one, to create a coat of arms, mm-hmm. and make it your own, make it your family crest.
Yes.
What is the significance of that?
Well, I think the significance of that specifically has to do with your belonging, because everybody wants to belong. And when you're in the family, that is your first place of belonging and feeling purpose and value. And if you have a connection to a belonging, then there's a lot more pride and a lot more things that you can infuse into your who you are. We created a family crest as well before my kids were born, the Robinson family crest. And I made up just sheets of paper out there in color, and I put them in a frame, and we all have them in our homes. My son, who went to college, he has one in his home. My sons wanted to get a tattoo, right? So they want a tattoo, and I'm like, okay, here's my.
This is backfiring a little bit.
Well, here's what I said: if you get a tattoo, the first one I ask you to get is the family crest. And so each of them on their 18th birthday, they were going to do it with or without me, but they got to do it with me, and I even paid for their tattoo of the family crest, because it's that belonging of anything. You belong to the Robinsons, and the Robinsons have a foundational belief in things, and there's some symbolism in the crest itself, that talks about there are Robinsons that are from the East and the West, and there are Robinsons who believe in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and we are cradled in the love of Christ, and there's things that symbolize that specifically. Yeah. But it's a part of that belonging that is very, very critical and very essential, because if they're not belonging to your family, they're going to find a place to belong.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what about the significance of bringing others into helping you with this the ceremony? Right.
Yeah,
I remember in the book it talked about how he brought other men in. I think you said you brought your brothers in.
Yes.
And they all have to play a role. Right. Tell me how that works.
Well, let me tell you a little bit. The 5 or the 4 rites of passage. We did the 5-year-old one. We did a 10-year-old rites of passage, where that kind of was about the birds and the bees, where you really kind of talk about the real things about what's going to happen when they become an adolescent. And it's now I did at 10 years old because more and more we're seeing that kids are learning about sexual things sooner than maybe when you and I were born. 10 years old now, if we don't let them know now, they're learning from their friends. Yeah. So 10-year-old, we go for a weekend away and we learn, we do that. And I always have a theme that is associated with that rites of passage. And I give them a treasure chest or something that is filled with symbols and icons. And part of that is letters from their uncles and letters from their grandfathers that talk about, I use a scripture specifically that I would have a theme on, and one is Proverbs, that I would desire that my son would adhere to wisdom, incline your ear to my words, and open up your mouth to get wisdom, to ask for it and yearn for it. So we had the uncles and the grandfathers write letters about what it means to be a man and their journey along that pathway. And so they found that, discovered it, make it something fun to how they discover their treasure chest. And then the 13-year-old, I take him away to a trip to Jamaica. And you don't have to always do something that extravagant, but it just happened to be that my wife and I went to Jamaica, and I always thought I would really love to come back here one day. And at 13, they're at that stage where they're really kind of trying to be who they are. And the theme that I always did for that is, for the boys, it was preparing to fight your own battles. And for the girls, when I took my girls, it was discovering the strength of a woman. And when you get into a unfamiliar environment, you really get the opportunity to kind of let your insecurities show up. They show up, and if you can harness them and identify what's happening, you really can help them to learn from that experience. So I had that.
Now, does this whole process work the same with girls?
It's I believe it works with girls a little different in some of the definitions of what it means to be a woman versus what it means to be a man. But the value of that I'm going to grow into the woman that God has called me to be, and having some definition of that is very clear. That it helps them along the way as well.
Well, what else? Tell me, is there anything else before we wrap it up? That
the culmination of all of these, 16-year-old was one about their friends, and then 18, we had a big ceremony. We rented out a place. We had friends come, and all the friends who have been in my life, who have been in their life, they come and they then speak about who he is and what they have seen in his life. Really? And it becomes the final. They get the bead. I award them with, on the sword that I gave them for their 13-year preparing to fight, inscribed on there the theme of their rites of passage, their 18. One son's was rise up, and another son's was shine bright and lead on. And so these are themes that I've given them throughout their life based upon who I've seen God made them to be.
And did you get them a full-blown sword?
Full-blown sword. They have a sword that's cool. That's engraved, and I give them that sword when they get back from Jamaica because it's preparing to fight their battles. Yeah. And that's the symbol of a man will fight his battles. And then, of course, my theme of understanding that the Lord goes before us, though, and he fights our battles as we yield to him. So our fighting battles really is yielding to the Lord.
Wow. That's fantastic. Now, do they still to this day treasure
all
those things?
The treasure box. In fact, I just talked to my son a few months ago, and he was going through his treasure box, and he was looking through them, and the one thing that he said about it, he says, what I didn't realize then is how significant these things would mean to me now. And that was, you can't, when he says that, and he can read back through the letters, and he can see what the little icons meant and things that I put attention to. He says, I didn't realize how much you put into it. And I think it's when our kids grow, our sons grow to be these men, that it really becomes solidified when they look back to say, this is how I was raised. Yeah. This is the man that I've been raised to be. Yeah. You know, because think you and I, there's still things that we didn't know, even when we were in that stage of being a man, that began to solidify after we actually started walking that path and going, this is really who I am.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming in, joining us, and
thank you.
And teaching us all the, the experience you've had with it. I got years to go, but better start now, right?
Yeah, it's a joy, though. It's going to be a joy.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Guys, thank you so much for listening to God's Men of Influence, and we're going to have a lot more like this. Just check back on our website regularly. It's godsmenofinfluence.org. Also, all the Facebook stuff and all that. Just God's Men of Influence, you'll find it. Thank you. See you next time.